Alrighty folks, take a look at this teeny tiny little seed in my hand. And a few months ago, that plant germinated and started to grow. And about 6 weeks ago, we transplanted it into the garden as just a tiny little plant baby. But now, after 6 weeks of being in the garden under the sun, it is absolutely thriving. And fortunately, it's got enough space. But there's a couple other areas in my garden where I've got too many plants growing and they're gonna start competing with one another. So in today's video, what I'm gonna walk you through is why thinning out our seedlings is super important and exactly how to go about doing it. So as we get started here, if you do have any questions at any point, just go ahead and leave those down in the comments here. I start every one of my days having a cup of coffee and answering every question that we receive on YouTube here. So you're gonna get a response from me super quickly. Now, when it comes to thinning out seedlings, there's 4 key reasons why this is really important to be doing. So when we look right here, I've got 2 cabbage plants growing side by side. And the first key reason why we want to thin them out is because they're about to start competing for both nutrients as well as water. So when we look at these 2 plant babies, their root system is in the exact same spot, and that means that their roots are pulling all of the macronutrients, the micronutrients, as well as the water from that area. So now they're essentially just at competition for one another, trying to put on growth rather than having just the one plant and allowing it to grow to its fullest potential. Now, the second reason why it's really important to be thinning your seedlings is specific to our plants that have a taproot, such as carrots and parsnips, etc. And the reason why we want to thin these ones out is because these rooted vegetables, if they're not thinned out, they're going to start wrapping around one another and constricting each other. And so the growth on them is both going to be limited as well as not straight. It's going to be kind of like wonky in different directions. And so I've actually forgotten to thin these plants out at the time that I normally do. So I want to take a look now and see how are they doing beneath the surface. Alrighty, so what we can see here is I've got 2 really quite mature carrots at this point, really too far along, and we can see that there are both of the carrots right there. And so we're actually going to give these a quick little harvest and see what's happening beneath the surface here. And so as you can see, look at that right there. It's not growing straight down. It's been kind of constricted by this one over here, and it's now gone upwards and growing in the opposite direction. So that is not the type of carrot that we'd be looking for, the nice and straight ones. But let's continue along. So the third reason why we want to go about thinning our seedlings is to decrease and to prevent disease from settling in. And so when we think about some of our summer vegetables, such as squashes, cucumbers, zucchinis, they're really susceptible to powdery mildew. And powdery mildew, it settles in a low airflow environment. And when plants are planted really densely, there's no airflow throughout there, making it really easy for powdery mildew not only to settle in, but also to spread from one plant to the next because they're all touching one another. So by thinning them out, we're creating a little bit more airflow throughout the plants. And then for a little bonus, you could utilize a trellis structure such as our squash trellis, which is linked up above, and that's going to allow them to grow into new space. So they still have tons of space without competing with one another. So the fourth and most important reason why we want to be thinning our seedlings is to ensure that they are getting enough sunlight. And so when we look at these 2 kale plants that I have right behind me here, I transplanted both of them in to ensure that at least one of them would survive and begin to grow. But now they're both established, they're both growing, but what's happened is that the one that was slightly further along and more mature, it's put on a little bit more growth. And so now the smaller of the 2, it isn't getting any sunlight, and therefore it's only falling further and further behind. But on top of that, it's still grabbing nutrients from the soil, it's taking water from the soil, and it's decreasing airflow around that one plant that we have that's growing really well, which ultimately is just going to create more headaches than any benefit to us. And so it's for this reason that we want to begin thinning out these seedlings. And what I'm going to walk us through next is exactly how to go about thinning out our seedlings. Now, just before we touch on that, for those of you that I have not met before, I'm Jordan from Mind and Soil, where we're looking to introduce 1 million individuals to gardening's mental health benefits. So if you're looking for more peacefulness, more joy, more restoration in your life, then I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here. So we put out new videos every single week, just like this one, taking as much of the guesswork out of gardening so that you can be spending all of your time just playing in the garden, getting your hands dirty, and feeling how good it is to be gardening. So when it comes to thinning out these plant babies, it's super easy easy and straightforward. Let's head over to those carrots to get started. And so for thinning out these seedlings, what's important to note is that I practice square foot gardening. And so when I am direct sowing this bed with seeds, I'm placing 3 seeds into each one of the divots where I want a plant to begin to grow. But what's happened here, and what usually happens, is that multiples germinate. So rather than just having the 1 seed germinating, I end up with actually 2 seeds germinating or 3 seeds germinating and beginning to grow into plant babies, which is why we now begin to thin them out. And normally I like to do this around the 3-week mark, so about 21 days in. And all that you need to do is take a look at your plant babies, find the largest one, and that's the one that you're going to keep. And then any others that have germinated in that little divot, all that you're going to do is with your pruning shears, go right down to the soil level and simply snip the main stem. And then you're just going to go from one divot to the next, thinning each of them out with your pruning shears. If you didn't have pruning shears, you could pinch them as well. I recommend this instead of pulling them from the soil so that you don't disturb the root systems on the plants at all. Alrighty, and so the last thing that we're going to cover off on is how to go about thinning out seedlings that you transplanted into the garden. So recall from earlier that there are times where I will transplant a couple of little plant babies into the same hole, just to make sure that at least one of them survives the transplant and that we have the whole garden full with plant babies. And so then after about 7 to 10 days, we're all set and ready to begin thinning them out. All that we need to do at that point is grab our pruning shears, go to the plant and find the smallest one that's going to inevitably get shaded out and not add any value to us in the garden, and then simply prune or cut the main stem right where it enters into the soil. Alrighty, and there is the little seedling that we cut out of the garden there, thinned out. And it's a little bit bittersweet because this baby is at the end of its road heading to the compost, but the baby that is in the garden is now totally set up to be thriving this season. And so with that being said, if you're like, I can't pull any of the plant babies out of my garden, they all need to stay in there, by all means do that. And what I'd encourage you to do is run it as a little bit of an experiment. So in a couple of these square feet that you have, thin out the plant babies. And then in the square feet right beside them for the same variety, leave them all growing in there, don't do any thinning. And at the end of the season, make some observations on how the plants grew, what you found worked best, and use all that information to inform the decisions that you make and how you plan your garden next season. Those are really, really great learnings because each of us are going to have our own little personal preferences. And if you don't have any feel for how much space carrots need versus kale versus broccoli versus tomatoes, that's totally okay. And we actually do have a space planner that you can get your hands on. I have a link down in the description of this video. This is the exact space planner that I use all throughout my garden and that I've made kind of like little tweaks and variations to based off of what I've found works best. So if you want to get your hands on that, just head down to the link in the description of this video. Other than that, folks, that's everything that I wanted to cover off on for today. If you do have any questions, just leave those down in the comments here. I can't wait to catch you on the next video. Go get those hands dirty, and I'll see you soon.